You slice your palm open on a flake of flint deep in the Zagros Mountains, 60,000 years before anyone builds the first hospital. By nightfall, the skin around the cut is hot, swollen, starting to weep. There is no antibiotic ointment in your bag, no pharmacy, not even the word infection in any language you speak yet. Someone nearby chews bark into a paste, packs it into the wound, and stays close enough to check on you through the night. Neither of you knows if it will work. And if you're one of the people this video is actually about, you live. Right now, a cut like that costs you 20 minutes and a pharmacy aisle stocked with antiseptic, stitches, and pills built in a lab. You barely register it. For more than 99% of the time humans have existed on this planet, none of that existed, and people still reached adulthood, raised children, and grew old. So how did people with no antibiotics, no anesthesia, no germ theory, and no concept of a hospital survive infection, broken bones, and open wounds long enough to become your ancestors? In September 1991, two hikers named Helmut and Erika Simon spotted something sticking out of melting ice in the Tstal Alps. It turned out to be a body, later named Tsi, roughly 5,300 years old. Threaded onto a leather cord in his gear were two walnut-sized lumps of a fungus called Piptoporus betulinus, one that grows only on birch trees. That fungus is bitter. It's useless as food, and it's a poor source of fuel for fire. What it does carry are compounds that fight parasites and slow bacterial growth, and later testing of Tsi's gut found whipworm eggs, a parasite this exact fungus is known to purge. He wasn't hauling decoration around his neck, he was carrying a dosage, 5,000 years before the word pharmacology existed. And he'd matched the right fungus to the right symptom. So that's one man, one fungus. How widespread was this kind of knowledge, really? In 2017, a team led by geneticist Laura Wyrick sequenced DNA trapped in the hardened dental plaque of Neanderthal teeth from El Sidrón cave in northern Spain, plaque that turned out to be 48,000 years old, among the oldest microbial DNA ever recovered. One of the individuals had a visible dental abscess and an intestinal parasite that would have caused him serious pain and diarrhea. Buried in his teeth, the researchers found DNA from poplar bark, a natural source of salicylic acid, the compound aspirin is built from. Sitting right alongside it, DNA from a penicillium mold, the same genus of fungus that eventually gave the world penicillin. He was sick, in obvious pain, and 48,000 years before anyone synthesized either compound in a lab, he appears to have reached for something remarkably close to both. Everyone assumes Neanderthals were dim, brutish, freezing in caves and grunting at rocks. The evidence says the opposite, a sick individual in real distress, correctly self-treating with two separate compounds that are still sitting in your medicine cabinet today, just repackaged and mass-produced. But here's where survival gets genuinely strange. Now picture something far more extreme than a bark poultice, cutting a hole directly into someone's living skull. Bioarchaeologist John Verano at Tulane University, working with physician David Kushner and anthropologist Anne Teitelbaum, studied hundreds of trepanned skulls recovered from Peru, spanning nearly 2,000 years from around 400 BC through the Inca period in the 1500s. Published in 2018, their results were not what anyone expected. In the earliest period they examined, roughly 40% of patients survived the surgery. By the centuries just before the Inca rose to power, survival in some samples climbed as high as 91%, holding at an average of 75 to 83% through the empire itself. You can tell because the bone kept growing afterward, smooth and rounded, evidence the person lived on for months or years. Compare that to the American Civil War, 3.5 centuries later, where doctors using similar cutting techniques saw close to half their patients die before their skulls had time to heal at all. Everyone assumes ancient skull surgery was a death sentence, a desperate last act on people who were doomed anyway. The data says the opposite. Later, Peruvian surgeons got measurably better at it across the centuries, refining the technique through observation and shared knowledge the same way any surgical specialty improves today. In 1957, archaeologist Ralph Selecki excavated a site called Shanidar Cave in the same Zagros Mountains where this video opened. Inside, he found the remains of a Neanderthal man researchers now call Shanidar 1. Later analysis, led by paleoanthropologist Eric Trinkos, showed the man was blind in one eye, had lost his lower right arm, and was profoundly deaf. Injuries that should have made hunting and even basic self-care nearly impossible in his world. And yet every one of those injuries had fully healed. He lived on for years afterward, dying at an estimated 35 to 45 years old. Genuinely old for a Neanderthal. He could not have gotten there alone. Someone brought him food when he couldn't hunt. Someone protected him when he couldn't defend himself. His survival isn't really evidence of medicine at all. It's evidence of something else. Everyone assumes a prehistoric life expectancy of 30 meant people were old and worn out by their 30s. In 2004, anthropologists Rachel Kaspari and Sang-Hee Lee examined wear patterns across roughly 750 fossil teeth spanning 3 million years, and found that starting around 30,000 years ago, the ratio of older adults to younger ones quadrupled almost overnight. The average was dragged down hard by brutal infant and childhood mortality. The people who made it past their 20s routinely lived into their 50s and beyond. So which of these was the actual medicine? None of them. Not really. Not on their own. Every piece of evidence points to the same underlying system, knowledge that outlived any single person, tested and retested across generations, and passed forward by people who cared enough about each other to bother. A blind man with one arm does not heal himself. A sick young man does not correctly identify poplar bark while dying alone in a cave with no one to feed him through the fever. The fungus, the bark, the surgery, all of it were just tools. The actual technology, the thing that kept an entire species alive for hundreds of thousands of years with zero hospitals, was other people, refusing to let each other die. Go back to that cut on your palm, deep in the Zagros Mountains, 60,000 years before the first hospital exists. You didn't survive because you were strong. You survived because someone chewed bark into a paste for you, packed it into the wound, and stayed close enough through the night to notice if the fever got worse. That's the part modern medicine quietly replaced. Not the ingredients. You can still buy aspirin's ancestor at any pharmacy. What disappeared was the person sitting next to you while you healed. Ancient humans didn't out-survive us because they had better medicine. They survived because no one was ever expected to heal alone.